All right, everybody, we're going to get started. Welcome to the first Student Talk Back Lunch of the fall semester. For those of you who I haven't met previously, my name is Dan Schnur, and I'm the director of the Unruh Institute of Politics. And we co-sponsor this lunch series every week, along with our friends at the Daily Trojan. And I'm joined this week, as always, by one of the editors of the Daily Trojan. This week by their editor-in-chief, Annalise Mantz, who will be moderating today's panel with me. And we also will be co-sponsoring the lunches this year with the Schwarzenegger Institute. And Bonnie Reese, the global director for the Schwarzenegger Institute, is here with us today. And I'm going to introduce Bonnie, let her say a few words about her and the governors and their whole team's commitment to the kind of discussions that we like to have here. And then we'll get the discussion started.
Thank you, Dan. I just want to say on behalf of Arnold Schwarzenegger and our institute, how grateful we are to be able to partner with Unruh and bring these series of conversations to USC students in the USC community for the next 9 weeks. And what a great way to kick it off with two legislators in residence who when I was senior advisor to the governor and worked in Sacramento, had an opportunity to see firsthand how effective and respected and remarkable these two leaders are. So it's exciting to be able to bring you these people today and interesting policy focuses for the next 8 weeks and other leaders that you'll be able to hear from and share with. So they'll get the benefit of your vision, perspective, and ideas, and through your questions, you'll get the benefit of theirs. So we're grateful to have that. We want each of these to be empowering, to let you know the difference you each can make both now as students and, of course, as the future leaders of our state, nation, and world. So thank you.
In addition to our two legislators in residence, we're joined by two student experts also, as we will be every week. For those of you who haven't attended our programs in years past, or I'll say this the other way, for those of you who have attended our programs in years past, you know that we have an absolute rule at the Unruh Institute, and it's a philosophy that we share with Bonnie and her colleagues at the Schwarzenegger Institute, which is that we will not do programming in our institute unless it includes students not only as audience members, but as panelists and participants as well. It's our feeling that you guys, during your time at USC, get more than enough of old people talking at young people. And what we try to do by including undergrad SC students as part of these discussions is make it clear to you guys that if these are the kind of things that are of interest to you, and you take the time to prepare for these conversations by reading about them and thinking about them and reflecting them, what you'll see today and every Wednesday throughout the semester is that there's no reason that a smart USC undergrad can't hold his or her own in serious policy or political conversation and discussion, even with people who've been doing this for 10 or 20 or 30, or Anthony, I guess it's 60 years now.
65.
What we'll do is Annalise and I will take the first half of today's program to ask questions of our panelists, and then at the halfway point, we'll open it up to all of you for questions for you to put to any or all of our panelists. Most of our topics are pretty policy specific. Next week, we're going to talk about the issue of fracking. The week after that, Laura's at K-12 education, is that correct? Public education reform in California. And through the semester, we'll talk about healthcare, we'll talk about higher ed, we'll talk about immigration, any number of other issues of importance to USC students and to Californians. But today we wanted to start with something a little bit bigger and a little bit broader. We wanted to talk about what we call student power. We wanted to talk about how young people, college students and others, how young people, how millennials can make a difference in politics or government, how they can help make California politics work again better than it has in years past, and what kind of role and what kind of opportunities are available for young people. So real quick, although Bonnie alluded to them also, I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then Annalise and I will kick off the questions. Sitting way down at the other end of the table is Alex Kludjian, and Alex is the executive director for the USC College Republicans. And right here, because we do these panels in a balanced way, sitting in a very nice suit and tie, is Aaron Taxy, who is the just former president of the USC College Democrats. So let's welcome both of our student panelists. And then the really tall guy sitting between our two student panelists is Tony Strickland. He's a former state senator from the 19th district up in Ventura County. And here right next to me is Anthony Portantino, former California State Assemblymember of the 44th district.
You left out the tall part.
The tall part. Let's welcome both of our legislators in residence.
Maybe to start off the conversation, I'll direct a question to you, Anthony. And I saw an interesting statistic recently that of the younger so-called millennial generation, almost 2/3 are active in volunteerism or with an issue-based nonprofit, but we see such low numbers of voter turnout and in more traditional political participation. What do you think that comes from?
Well, I think the first part is exciting that so many young people are getting involved in nonprofits, and I think I represented Pasadena, and it was the nonprofit center of the world. And you're right, there were so many college and high school Gold Award Scouts, Eagle Scout projects, PCC students, and I think it's because they can see the benefit of their work. When you're working at a battered women's shelter or a homeless shelter, or you're raising money or resources to help a family, and then you deliver those packages, you actually see the smiling faces of the young children that your toy drive benefited. And I think with government, I think it's harder to see how your involvement affects the process. And I think part of the onus is on us as the legislators, as the political infrastructure, to have that dialogue with young people so you can see the benefit of your work. So I think the exciting base is there for the support. We just have to make sure that the system allows for the advocacy and the passion to pay dividends.
Aaron, let's give you a chance to weigh in here. Last year, you interned for a campaign in the San Fernando Valley, relatively close to home. But for a lot of people, young people and older people, Washington, D.C., Sacramento, these places seem pretty far away and pretty abstract. And how does somebody sitting in Los Angeles, California, make a difference with people who are so far away and don't seem to be paying much attention to what we're doing way out here? That is a pretty significant obstacle for political participation, isn't it?
Well, it's a very significant obstacle, and where I think it starts as well, many of the issues that I care about happen to be at a federal level. Foreign policies and international relations major is very important to me, and therefore it was important to me to work for a congressional campaign that dealt a lot with foreign policy in the San Fernando Valley, huge immigrant populations from Israel, from Latin America. I think that for a lot of people, the way to get engaged should start at the grassroots. With my generation, so many people feel like they don't have a stake in our political process anymore. We see the front page of the New York Times. We see fiscal cliffs for a long time, budget battles up in Sacramento that seemed never ending. But where we have found our ability to change the status quo has been at the local level. An example is a very good friend of mine at UC Berkeley worked for the last few years as part of their student government to institute a student district on the Berkeley City Council. I can guarantee you that from now on, the students at UC Berkeley will feel a sense of obligation to their city and will have a stake in their city's well-being, not just their campuses, their cities. And it's people who start off as local activists like this that I think will affect broader change. Aaron Schock, a Republican congressman from Illinois, he started off as a local school board member in the exurbs, and now he's a congressman. He cared about his school district, and now he's a member of Congress. I think this is a change. I think that the change starts local, and with time, will ideally become a national, will affect positive change at the national level.
And maybe turning to you, Tony, on this, once students or young people do get active at the grassroots level and they're kind of ready to take on bigger issues, whether at the state level or even at the national level, how can they get involved in the legislative process? And do you have any ideas maybe from your time in the state Senate?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The one thing that I see in politics, it's very easy to get involved. And really, when young people come into my office and they want to get involved, my first question is, what's your dream job? What do you want to accomplish? I mean, what's your 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan? And when you know as an elected official, as a state senate office, or when I first got involved, the key is that you have a focus. If there's a specific issue, if it's foreign policy, if it's an Israel relationship around the world, or whether it's something that's local in terms of healthcare, or it just depends on what that goal is. I can tell you, politics is easy to break into if you're willing to put the effort and time and work towards it. Example in my case, Dan and I've been friends a long time, but when I first got involved, my dad was a maintenance man. He was a career military soldier, and I said, Ronald Reagan was my inspiration. I said, I want to get active and involved. My parents were not politically active, thought I was crazy, but they were very supportive. They dropped me off at the headquarters, and I started working on campaigns. And then the person that I helped ended up becoming a legislator, and I saw that person making a difference. I got goosebumps when I was there because I knew I had a small part to play in that person being in Sacramento. Then fast forward, I got elected when I was 27 years old to the state legislature. And if I had a nickel for every person that said I couldn't get that accomplished, I would have been fully funded. But I had a lot of young people involved in my campaign, and what I did is I learned everything I could about campaigns to help, because campaigns were a way to get you into office, but the key is know why you're doing it. And I always wanted to make a difference, and one person can hugely make a difference. And young people, if I didn't have the support of USC College Republicans, if I didn't have the support of Pepperdine, and a lot of the young people that rallied around my campaign when I was 27 years old, I wouldn't have been elected. And one person can make a huge impact, but a group of young people coming together can make that huge impact and really make a huge difference in terms of who you send to Washington, who you send to Sacramento. But as the gentleman said right here, he's absolutely right. All politics is local. Tip O'Neill once said, if you don't take care of your local community, you can't worry about the things in Washington.
Let's give Alex a chance to weigh in here. Alex, everybody makes it sound so easy for a young person who wants to get politically involved to do it. But the truth of the matter is, we, us old people, we stack the deck against you, don't we? We make it hard for you.
Yes. I think one thing that we need to realize as the younger generation, the millennials, if you will, is that yes, we may feel disenfranchised with Washington just being full of adults who perhaps don't identify with the same causes that we have close to home. We need to realize that politics is here to stay, and that it is our job to intervene in that process and make sure our voices are heard. And I think a really easy way that you can do that is just identify a few issues that you're really passionate about. And you might think, oh, I'm an engineer, I'm something that doesn't really have to do with politics, but organically at the lowest level, or at the lowest level, everything is affected by public policy. And I'm not saying you have to go out and run for office and give away your dreams of being whatever you may want to be, but it's simply forming a group on campus, joining a club on campus that you can identify with fellow students for, and then there's a ripple effect. You're at the local level, like you guys are saying, and then you guys go and advocate for legislators who also can identify with you, and there's coalition building. You can go to the steps of the Capitol and rally for what you believe in. There's so many different things that you can do that truly do make a difference. It might take time, and you might think, well, I'm not really actually making a difference, but it's every little crack that you can make into the issue that you believe that truly in the end can produce a fundamental change.
So Alex, just to follow up with you, and then we'll circle back to the other panelists in just a minute. What I hear you saying is there's a lot of different ways of doing this. You can work in the office of an elected official, a legislator, a congressman, a mayor, or a governor, or on a campaign, but there's also a way from the community to make a difference, not just as a volunteer, but in the political process as well. Talk a little bit, because you've seen both in action. What's the benefit of each of those two approaches? What do you think, inside versus outside?
Well, I think both obviously are necessary for completing your goals, but just to clarify, so you're asking whether people should advocate to...
No, you made it pretty clear that there's two different ways to be involved. Mm-hmm. On the inside, going to work for an office holder or a candidate, or on the outside, working in the community to encourage those elected officials to make the change that's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two different ways of being involved. They both sound pretty good. I'm not asking you if one's better or worse than the other.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you think might be the attraction of one versus the other?
Well, kind of to echo what Mr. Portantino had mentioned, the actual tangibility of being able to see, like, if you're working for a nonprofit and you can see the people face to face that you're helping, that I can see why our generation is attracted to. And that goes with why we feel so disenfranchised. Politics is such a complex process that you can work at something and you won't see results for 5 or 10 years. Whereas if you're volunteering at a soup kitchen or whatever it is, you know that you have an impact right then. And so I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I think that kind of explains the tangibility factor. But like I said, it's important, and it's just as important to actually be on the inside level and make your voice heard, because in the end that can have the profound effect that can affect, things on every level.
I was going to say, can I jump in on that if that's okay? I think you're 100% right, having experiences in both, but just if you're in the room, and Hovannes used to work for me, so he can attest to this. In my office, all of our legislative meetings, the interns sat in on, and when we would pitch bill ideas, the interns in my office would pitch bill ideas, and not just to have them go through an exercise, but to actually get the benefit. And one of the bills that Governor Brown signed in my last term was a bill that my intern was researching the tattoo removal program, and she saw that the federal government was giving money to the state to pay for tattoo removal of gang members, but not young women who were forced into prostitution or trafficked, whose pimps had branded them. They did not qualify for the free tattoo removal. And my intern saw that and said, we need to rectify that injustice, and we put a bill in, and it was signed by the governor, and she got to present that bill and got to shepherd that bill and got to staff that bill, and it was her idea that got signed into law. So being in the room allows you to affect the outcome, and we as legislators want that input, and it's so up to us to communicate that to you. Now, I will also say the recent mayor of San Francisco, when he was a Congress member, my nephew interned in his office, and he was told one day, we make sure every intern gets 20 minutes with the Congress member during your 3 months. That can tell you a little bit about the character of that politician. So,
for those of you who are thinking about interning this semester, don't worry, we don't send interns to that office anymore.
Exactly. So, is every office going to be perfect? No, but the opportunities are there for those who are aggressive enough and committed enough to take it, and that's partly our job to make sure that those doors are open.
And maybe to follow up with you on that, what do you think the advantages are to the elected officials and the politicians when young people do get involved in politics and get enthused about it?
Well, first of all, you're on the front line of, young people are on the front line of so many issues, and we as politicians, we're planning for the future, right? It's your future we're planning for. So you have the hopes and dreams and aspirations and the desires, that passion that we borrow. I can tell you that there was one issue where there was an army of high-priced lobbyists in my room who were lobbying me to do something on alcohol. And when 3 Girl Scouts came into my office with their Girl Scout uniforms, and I knew the leader, I sided with the Girl Scouts. And I went back to the army of lobbyists and I said, you want me to cross the Girl Scouts? I'm not doing that. So that matters.
Aaron, I'm going to broaden this discussion onto the national political stage for a moment, because one of the things, and Alex has talked about it, and, well, all of you have in slightly different ways, that when you work as part of the political or governmental processes, change takes time. And I will say to all of you here, and some of you have heard me say it before, volunteering isn't just admirable, it's noble, but one person can only clean up so many parks. One person can only bring so many meals to so many seniors who are not able to do that for themselves. And what you're hearing from all of these, each of our panelists in slightly different ways, is if you want to see the changes happen that are important enough to you to volunteer, if you want to see those changes happen not just on an individual scale, but on a mass scale, going inside those doors to get the work done might not pay off quite as quickly, but you can have the change happen on a much broader basis. So Aaron, I'm going to come to you now. When Barack Obama ran for president in 2008, he did, in a way that had not been done in many years, excited an unprecedented number of young people to get involved in traditional politics. He received huge support from the millennial generation, and they turned out in very significant numbers to vote and to participate in his campaign. 5 years later, while he still enjoys a decent level of support from that same generation, to some degree attendance seems to have dissipated a little. And just like change takes a while in politics or government, sometimes it's hard to stay excited or enthusiastic about something or someone for a long period of time. You were the president of the College Democrats. I don't doubt that your enthusiasm is as high as it was 5 years ago, but that's not the case on a broader scale. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. And something that some of my fellow panelists have hit on is they've talked about the impact one makes in micro-volunteering. When you're at a soup kitchen, you hand a plate over to a homeless person, you feel like you made an immediate change. I think that also translates to all realms of life for millennials. We're the iPhone generation. With our iPhones, we're able to solve problems that 20 years ago would have taken all day to solve in about 5 minutes. And so Barack Obama spoke to us in that language, in the language of the iPhone generation, in the language of the Facebook generation. And that generated a lot of excitement because while he promised all of these things that I think that he has accomplished, like him or not, he's ended the war in Iraq, he's passed healthcare reform, his broader message was that he was going to break down Washington and rebuild it for our generation. And one of the reasons why, while my generation is still supportive of Obama, they're not nearly as excited about him as they were in 2008, is because it's hard to preserve that enthusiasm, because he went into Washington with all of those great intentions, but what ended up happening was that he needed to work within the system rather than break it down from the outside like he thought he was going to do. So it's hard to preserve that kind of enthusiasm, and I think that is the responsibility of our elected officials to try and to constantly try and incentivize young people to get enthusiastic about the political process. And I'm talking about future candidates are going to really have to consider this to even just get out the vote.
And I'm curious to get your perspective on this, Alex. We talk about this notion that President Obama brought in 2008 of rebuilding Washington for our generation. What can elected officials and young people do to rebuild Washington if we see that as the need?
Well, there's plenty of things we can do, but really quick, just to go back to what he said, I think the underlying problem here is that, in fact, the 18 to 30-year-old demographic is not targeted by most campaigns because they simply don't think, well, first of all, we don't vote for the most part, which is the first problem, and they don't think it's worthwhile, and that's really the message that we have to get across. Like, we are a worthwhile electorate, and I think that's why Obama did do so well in 2008. He did reach out through social media and channels that hadn't been previously explored. But for us personally to go about and rebuild Washington, I think joining a campaign like that you actually believe in and making sure that they don't go out and just target retirement communities where they know that 90% of the people are going to turn out to vote. It's things like that are actually going to make a big difference, because only you can go in and make the change and say our voices need to count as well. And otherwise we just have a system that's perpetually not including us, and it's unfortunate that it won't self-correct, but I think it's the actual political participation factor, voting, going out onto campaigns, like I said, coalition building, all things like that, that are actually going to make the big difference and have our voices heard in Washington and stuff.
Alex makes a great point. When you watch the candidates out on the campaign trail, whether running for local or state or national office, It's not an accident that you hear them talk an awful lot about Social Security and Medicare, and not nearly as much about student loans, for just the reasons that Alex talked about.
Yeah.
But I want to come back, I want to come to Tony, and then we'll go to your guys' questions. And Tony, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the first point that Alex made. We talked a little bit earlier about how the body politic generally doesn't make a great deal of effort to reach out to young voters. You were a 27-year-old candidate. Did you talk to young voters in a different way than you talked to other older voters? And did you talk to young voters, in your opinion, in a different way than older candidates did?
I think all candidates talk to ways that you got to connect. I think that's one of the biggest problems that the Republican Party has had over the last 2 cycles. There wasn't a young person around that connected with John McCain, for example. And I know you worked with John, great American, but you know, a lot of the Republicans did the whole kind of campaign. They did the TV, the radio spots. But when you looked at Obama, and talk about investment in campaign, he used a huge investment in his campaign, not just against McCain back in 2008, but against Hillary. In fact, if you remember when he had Oprah come and he had Jay-Z come out, before you got in, you had to give your Twitter, you had to join, you had to do Facebook, and he invested heavily in Twitter, Facebook, in ways to communicate to the younger generation that the Republican Party missed and that Hillary Clinton missed. And I would argue today that President Obama would not have been president had he not had that huge investment into talking to young people in a way. And look, I represented UCSB. When I walked on campus, it was cool to be, you know, every bumper sticker had Obama on there in 2008. And as a Republican candidate, that was very, very difficult in terms of the branding when you had John McCain at the top. And so I think now you're seeing more elected officials look at that, Twitter followers, Hulu, and they're communicating in different ways than the traditional, what the Republican Party had missed. They did TV ads, they did, you know, the traditional radio. You have to talk to people in the way they communicate. So you're asking, did I communicate differently? Absolutely, on issues that young people cared about. For example, when I was first elected in the state assembly, again, I'm the only one at that time that was in my 20s. There was a bill that was going through the legislature that said they want to move the driver's license from 16 or 18 to 21 at one point in the proposal, or lift that age. But when you looked at the actual statistics of who got into more accidents, because that was the argument for the bill, it was actually the senior generation. Why? And I tell this to young people, and I always went out, and Dan, when you were teaching, I told this to young people all the time. Why is it that they wouldn't touch the higher accident rate? Well, seniors vote. And so you needed a voice. And I thought when I first got there, and I'm a little bit older today, I still feel like I'm 19, 20 years old in some ways, but you have to communicate in what they care about. Young people today, one of the large portions of the unemployment or the uninsured in healthcare are young people because they think they're invincible. And that doesn't move a voter, a young voter. Social Security really doesn't move young voters, but getting a job out of college does, right? I mean, so you got to talk into ways and hopefully motivate. Every generation has had different leaders that gravitated people towards a political party. John F. Kennedy had the Kennedy Democrats. You also had Reagan Republicans. I think Obama will go down as one of those people in this generation that will be very tough for Republicans to overcome, because now we've had 2 elections, 2 presidential election cycles where that percentage overwhelmingly voted for one particular party.
And just to clarify, at what age would you take my grandfather's driver's license away from me?
I would not. But then again, I didn't take it away from young people either.
Okay. For the second part of the program, as I mentioned earlier, Annalise and I stopped monopolizing the conversation and want to give you guys a chance to weigh in. And before we do, we'll make 2 requests of you today, as we do at all of our programming. If you raise your hand, we'll call on you, and when we do, we'll ask, number 1, that you tell us who you are, so we know who's participating in the conversation. And second, if you're going to be asking a question, particularly of somebody with whom you might disagree on something you heard from them, we ask that you frame that question with the same level of respect that you'd hope they'd show you if they were questioning you on something with which they disagreed. One of the things that's really important to us here in these conversations is that someone who disagrees with you is still someone with whom you can have a productive conversation. And while today's discussion, unlike some of the things we'll be covering over the rest of the semester, is hopefully not all that controversial, unless one of you really thinks your grandfather ought to rises. We ask that you do show our guests the respect that they deserve. Real quick before we begin your questions, though, we'll take a quick commercial break. For those of you who have heard anything over the first 30 minutes of conversation here that makes you think that getting involved in politics or government might be of interest to you, our political internship class at the Unruh Institute, Poli-Sci 395, has extended its deadline for signing up for an internship to this Friday, the 13th, not intentionally, at 5 o'clock p.m. And if you are interested, in working in an office of an elected office holder, for an organization that advocates for an issue or cause that's interesting to you, or doing research on an issue or cause that's important to you, Jody Epstein, who's sitting right in the front row here and is about to wave her hand so you can see who she is, a little bit higher. And Laura Hill, who's sitting way, way in the back, is going to do the same. They're both in the office pretty much nonstop between now and 5 o'clock Friday. And if you think that interning for academic credit, for 2 or for 4 credits is of interest to you, they're more than happy to talk to you about it. That said, let's broaden this discussion. Who among you might have questions for any of our panelists? Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Sam Andrew, and I'm an alumni. I did an MBA here. I have a question for Anthony, all of you, but more Anthony because he's actually in the belly of the beast as a legislator. Basically, you were talking about the comparison between the grassroots issue or making a change internally. And one of the things that nobody talks about, because it's a really hot potato internally, is basically, I'll give an example. Back in the Clinton administration, there was a gentleman called Mr. Arthur Levitt. He was the SEC chairman, and I'm actually a big fan of his because he actually tried to do the right thing on many issues. And basically, even with his power and his position, when this whole issue of expensing, during the dot-com issue era of, what do you call it, the stock options for CEOs or whatever, and either putting it as an expense or, just kind of putting it as a footnote or whatever, he was actually saying, hey, look, this is money out of the door. This should be expensed. And guess what? When he made an effort to try and change that, all these congressmen and whatever, all the CEOs in Silicon Valley picked up the phone, they called the Congress people, and guess what? Some senators pulled Arthur Levitt into their office and said, hey, Arthur, I think you need to back off.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think you're raising a really important premise here. For those of you who didn't hear the question, our guest, tell me your name again, I'm sorry? Sam. For those of you who didn't hear Sam, first he congratulated our panelists for the brilliance of their presentation. He said they were absolutely fascinating, and guys, I'd have to agree with him on it. But he raised a question, and he used a debate that took place at the Securities and Exchange Commission some years ago as an example. And Sam, I think I'm going to paraphrase accurately. The question he asked is, for all the idealism of anybody getting involved in politics as a volunteer or a young person getting involved in a campaign or a government office, there's some very powerful entrenched interests who spend a lot of money on campaigns. And sometimes that money can overwhelm even the most determined volunteer spirit. For Anthony and for Tony, both of whom served in the belly of the beast, talk a little bit about that. Does money trump idealism? And when can volunteer and young person's enthusiasm hold its own in the face of all that spending?
Well, I think first and foremost, no matter how tempted one is to get jaded and cynical, you just can't. You have to believe that tomorrow's going to be better. You just have to. Clinton once said, when your memories outweigh your dreams, you're getting old, but America's destined to be forever young. We have to believe that. We can never get to the point where we say, the other guy's more powerful, we're going to go home. The other guy has more influence because they spend money, we're not going to try. We just can't do that. That being said, you don't win every battle. That's a fact. I introduced, 200 bills, I got 38 passed. You don't win every battle, but that doesn't mean you don't fight every battle. I hate that notion about pick the hills you want to die on. And one of the criticisms I get is that I fight every battle. Well, damn right, you fight every battle. You just do, because those are the battles that need to be fought. Again, Dan is pushing an initiative to try to take money out of politics. I think it is a great idea. We should not be fundraising while we're in session. There are legislators who have fundraisers on the same day they have committee hearings. Why do they do that? Because they're having committee hearings and they know they're going to raise more money. And then there are legislators who don't call lobbyists who have lobbied them. So there's the legislators who do it right, and there's the legislators who do it wrong. We need to rally behind the ones who do it right. We need to rally behind the causes that need to be rallied. Yes, there's influences. Sometimes they win. That case they won, but they don't always win. And the more you get involved, the less. People power trumps money power. And there's a belief it's the opposite. I believe people power trumps money power.
Anthony mentioned an initiative that I'm pushing that would forbid fundraising during the legislative session. My colleagues at the Unruh Institute forbid me from advocating for it during our programming. So I'll simply say that if you decide to go to the website, www.fixingca.com, you'll go to heaven.
And nobody told me not to advocate for it, and I have no interest in it other than I think it's the right thing to do.
So Tony, you were in a different part of the belly of the same beast. Does money always win? And when doesn't it?
If money always won, Mitt Romney would be president, and Meg Whitman would be governor today.
Right.
You know, I have found, by the way, I've run against a few different candidates. The first one that I mentioned when I was very young, a shoestring campaign, volunteering. People power does trump money power. The person I ran against was director of planning and research for the governor at the time, CEO of a toy company, a large toy company, and it was partner in a big LA law firm. And we had, one, the message, but two, you know, the key here is to be able to drive home. And I always found that a lot of times when there's a lot of money and people write big checks to the campaign versus someone who walks door to door. If someone walks door to door for your campaign, they're telling everybody and their brother they're part of that team. I grew up playing team sports. And a lot of these people who write the big checks, they miss that part where someone's part of your campaign. And when someone writes a contribution, they also tell everybody. But there's a lot of there's a lot of campaigning against people who write checks as well. On the left, you know, the right likes to demonize George Soros, and on the left, they demonize the Koch brothers on the right. And so I think, you know, what we need to do is have full disclosure. The minute the contribution comes into a campaign, in the internet world, it should be full disclosure within 24 hours instead of waiting. And I think what happens now, a lot of these what we call super PACs or independent expenditures, you don't really know who's funding the campaign until after the election. And what happens is that candidate, many times I see those independent expenditures, those 527 committees, they run a far different campaign than the candidate. And I've been involved in a lot of campaigns as a candidate, but also working on campaigns. It's the candidate that's always the most hesitant to go over the top. Why? Because after election, these are the people that they're at the church with, at their local baseball fields, at the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club, at the grocery store, and they want to run a campaign that they can be proud of with their neighbors. And a lot of times, folks in Washington or Sacramento are running these campaigns because there's no accountability there. And so there's things that we can do in terms of campaign reform. I believe full disclosure. But does money influence that? Absolutely. But Anthony's right as well. People power supersedes money power. It really does. Because if everybody who spent the most money won, that's just not the case when you look at it. You have to have a message, and you have to be able to understand that there are some entities, if you do take a contribution, you're going to lose votes.
And I'd offer just one twist on Tony's last comment. People power can beat money power if the people decide it's worth their time and effort and energy.
Exactly.
And so when the public mobilizes, that's when you get the kind of outcome Tony's talking about. When people decide not to get involved and engaged, then that's when it goes the other way. Great question, Sam. Thank you. Anyone else have questions for any of our panelists? Yes.
Hi, Brian, I'm studying economics. My question, I guess, would be best for Alex and Aaron, but I guess the people that represent in the legislature can weigh in. What do you do about primary challenges or challenging people within your party who you don't feel are serving you best? I mean, you spoke about the congressman that would only meet for 20 minutes with his interns. Kind of feel like the parties themselves, it's great to want to join an existing campaign or an existing representative, but with such gerrymandering or demographics, it's hard to unseat someone who isn't serving their community.
So, Alex, Aaron, the question I hear is, and I'm going to phrase it much more harshly than you did, is what's the use? If the power brokers in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party want a certain person to win, you're pretty much out of luck, aren't you?
That's funny.
I mean, when it comes down to it, there is still a power structure, and you usually find new blood running only after a member of a given office is termed out. That being said, there have been positive steps to ensure that our government now is more representative than it was a few years ago. Just a few examples. California reformed its redistricting process. You mentioned gerrymandering. Now districts are not drawn by the members themselves. They're drawn by a bipartisan, nonpartisan, whatever you want to call it, panel of experts, of demographic experts, so that districts represent the constituents rather than the members' needs. Another example is that we've instituted an open primary process. So you mentioned that a bad representative might be ingrained in a given office. That's still obviously possible, but now what happens is that if a district is overwhelmingly Democrat, but there is a sizable amount of Republicans there, and let's say that a member is firebrand union, won't talk to business owners, saying self-deprecating things since I'm the Democrat on the panel, but if you're a moderate Democrat that cares about business, you could potentially form a coalition of Democrats and Republicans to run against that person and take that person all the way to the general election. So it's not just the party-based voting. So while I would say that you are right, there's a power structure, I think that we have taken steps, and people like Professor Schnur and other government reformers are continuing to take steps in order to bring politics back to the people.
Alex?
Yeah, and I would add, you can get to politics, changing politics by not going directly into the politics. Like, if you are unhappy with people who are currently elected officials, that's what you were saying, right? You cause a ruckus. You get people together, you go to the media, you stage a campaign exposing the things that you disapprove of and the things that need to be changed. And that kind of catalyzes from the ground up. Maybe somebody else comes to the forefront and says, I agree with this, I am going to stand by you guys and be your candidate. Or you introduce the issue to the table so the person actually does recognize that what you believe in is an issue that needs to be taken care of. So there's different channels that you can go through. It doesn't have to specifically be vote in the correct person or unseat the correct person. There's a lot of outside influences that can change what the person's agenda is and hopefully reflect what you want them to do.
Anthony? Any of that, Tony?
Two specifics on just the Democratic Party structure. It's a very top-down structure, there's no question. But to go to Dan's point on when the activists get riled up, they can change the rules. And there are two things happened recently. There was a big money transfer that happened in 2006 that outraged the Democratic activists within the party. And they, when picking the next treasurer, the insider person lost to the grassroots activist treasurer specifically because the money management touched a chord. Secondly, they used to move delegates around the state by the leadership fiat. Could say, we're going to send 100 delegates into this local district to pick the nominated person in a primary. And the local activists got all pissed off because they said, wait a minute, all of a sudden 100 delegates moved into the district and outvoted the local delegates. Well, the delegates got so outraged by that, they changed the rules to say you can no longer do that. That's not to say the leaders don't get their way, but when the local power of the delegates gets riled up, they make the change.
Well, let me give you a real world example. In 2006, when the power brokers were really all lined up behind Hillary Clinton. The power brokers, Bill Clinton was still incredibly popular when Obama ran at that time. He was really considered running as kind of running for VP almost when he announced. But the real issue became on the Democratic side, the war. And Obama was against the war, and Hillary voted for the war, and that became one of the big issues. But the power structure in within the Democratic Party was all in for Hillary. In fact, she was more of an heir apparent for the nomination in 2006 than she is today. And what happened was you have these challenges, and you have to now articulate where you stand on the issues. And Obama took the tidal wave, but he was clearly the underdog that went against the power brokers and the establishment within the Democratic Party to get that nomination and end up winning the presidency. So you do have those power brokers, but there's still many, many examples where someone has come up that went against that power broker structure and been successful.
And certainly many in your party as well, Tony.
Absolutely.
Ted Cruz in Texas and Mike Lee in Utah, and plenty of examples of challengers taking out incumbents. Bonnie?
I just wanted to reiterate a couple of really important points that our panelists made. When Anthony talks about you can't stop believing, you have to still believe in your promises that tomorrow can be better than today. That's true at the grassroots level, and it's also true at the leadership effort. The political reforms that Aaron was talking about that got passed, the redistricting and open primary, when Arnold was governor of the redistricting, he had to try 3 different times before redistricting passed. So the hanging in to keep trying, and if you don't get it right the first time, you don't give up, you keep going on, happens with political leaders as well as it does with grassroots. And on the point that Tony made, that people do trump money. One of the things, Arnold believing that a California Republican is different than a Texas Republican, found championing renewable energy policies, dealing with climate change was very important for the state of California. So among other things, a landmark climate change bill passed, and a few years thereafter, oil company people from Texas did a ballot initiative to try to reverse that. And that was big money coming in. But when a coalition of groups got together in California to make the voters aware that outside big money's coming in to stop this, they defeated it. So those are just more examples of that. And then on an empowering note to students, I'm going to give an example of, at the University of California, of course it's 10 campuses and 230,000 students, but they banded together when Cal Grants were in jeopardy of being cut with Governor Brown in the legislature. And they went in and made their case directly to legislative leaders, to senators, and to assembly people about what that means to them. And they turned the opinion on that and restored Cal Grants. So that's an empowering example of what student power can be on an issue. And just the final point I want to make, because it's what Dan and I and we all believe today and our series is, you know, someone said to me a long time ago, you should think of what you once said at your funeral when you're 110 years old or whatever, or you live to, right? And work back from there. So if what you want is a legacy beyond just, you know, you worked and made a lot of money, but that you gave something back to your community, the goal we have, whether it's getting involved in politics, however you are, lobbying an issue, working at a nonprofit, whatever it is, do something. Because the gift you have of your life and your skills, especially being USC students, you know, you're exceptionally gifted in that alone. And you have a lot to contribute with your life to the world. And we just hope to continue to encourage that with all of you.
And on the point of hoping to continue to encourage, I'll be a little bit more specific in how we hope to continue to engage you in these types all of you in these types of conversations. Starting tonight, we have a panel discussion at 6:30 p.m. in Levy Auditorium. We'll be talking about the crisis in Syria. Crossing the red line, will Syria be Obama's war? And we will have, as is the case today, 2 political and policy experts from off-campus and 2 political and policy experts from our student body discussing the president's speech last night as well as the surrounding conversation about the situation in Syria. That's tonight at 6:30 in Levy Auditorium. Food's served at 6:15. What kind of food is it, guys?
Good food.
Sandwiches. Okay, there you go. Also,
Steak.
and afterwards, Tony's taking everybody for steak. Also, next week, we'll continue the Students Talk Back series. And beginning next week, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to begin to focus the conversation more specifically on matters of public policy. Next week, we'll be talking about the issue of energy and energy exploration. More specifically, the title of our discussion is "To Frack or Not to Frack?" That is the question. And we'll have people on both sides of that discussion, both off-campus experts and students. And again, just as one last absolute shameless reminder, for those of you who think that getting some political or government or policy experience this semester might be of benefit to you, our Poli-Sci 395 class offers internships for 2 or 4 credits, and Jody and Laura and the rest of our team are in the Unruh Institute offices in VKC 263 between now and 5 o'clock Friday in order to help you in any way they can. Finally, and most importantly, join me in thanking Alex Kludjian, Tony Strickland, Aaron Taxy, and Anthony Portantino for a terrific conversation. Thanks as well to Annalise Mantz for being a great co-moderator and her colleagues at Daily Trojan. To Bonnie Reese, to Conyers, and to Mebus, and to the team at the Schwarzenegger Institute for partnering with us on these programs today and all semester long. And finally, to our team at the Unruh Institute, Kirsten Olson and Drenna Hidalgo, Laura Hill, Jody Epstein, and all of our student workers for doing everything you do to make these programs come off our back. And finally, most importantly, thanks to all of you for coming and participating in this conversation. If we didn't have you here, this wouldn't work, so thank you very much for coming. We'll hope to see you either tonight or next week. Thanks very much.
It's great seeing you.